Okay, so we're going to talk more about solving systems by substitution. We've already done some of this, and the ones that we did were a little bit easier because you had both equations solved for the same variable, so you didn't have to do any algebraic manipulation first. So here we can see that neither one of them is solved for a variable, so we're going to have to do something about that. So one of the things that's good to do is to think about the equation that you have and actually make an intentional decision about which variable it makes sense to solve for, okay? So here I've got a 2x, I've got a 2y, and if I solve for either of these, right, I'm going to move one over, and then I'm going to have to divide by its coefficient. So both of these have coefficients other than 1, which means I'm going to have to do some division, okay? Here, I've got 1x and I've got 3y. This one is going to be easier to solve. It has a coefficient of 1, so it makes it much easier to solve, much less work. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'll start by putting that equation over here, and I'm going to solve it so that I get x on one side and everything else on the other. So I just have to subtract 3y from both sides. Okay, and this is my new form. There we go. Right? So I've changed this equation to this one. And now I need to do my substitution. So I'm going to take what I've circled here in red, this one over here, and I'm going to then substitute it in there. Okay? So when you substitute, it is always a good idea to keep your entire expression in parentheses, and then we deal with those afterwards. So I'm going to start with my 2, and then just for clarity's sake, I'm going to put this whole thing in for x. 1 minus 3y. Okay, so I'm taking my original equation, and where the x is, I put in my new expression. Okay, so everything else here is the exact same as this equation was, except I'm taking this whole expression and substituting it in for x. I'm replacing x with the value of that expression, right? The equal sign means that both of these are the same, so I can take that and put it in here. And remember, we can do that because the solution to my system is when both of those equations are at the same value. They have the same point. They're intersecting. So I can put that in here. All right, and then I'm just going to solve for y. So there's different ways to do this. I'm going to distribute because I know I'm going to want to get my y's together. So here I'm going to distribute first. Okay, and then I can combine. Subtract 2. I'm going to move that so you can see what I'm doing. I'll divide by -8. And I get y equals -1/4. Okay. Then let's see here. So here are my original equations. We just changed this one to x equals 1 minus 3y, substituted that in here, and then when we solved it, we got y equals -1/4. So now I'm going to take my y equals -1/4 and put it back into my equation. Okay, and I get 2x equals plus 1/2, right? Because I've got a negative times a negative, so that becomes, this is 2/4, positive 2/4, which I just reduced to 1/2, equals 4. So 2 x. If I subtract 1/2 from both sides, I get 3.5, which is the same as 7/2. And then I'm going to multiply by 1/2, which is the same as dividing by 2. And I get x equals 7/4. So that means my point would be 7/4, comma, negative 1/4. Okay? So I used this equation to get both of my x and y values. Now I want to check it in this one. So I'm going to do x plus 3, y equals 1. I'm going to substitute my 7/4 in for x and my negative 1/4 in for y. And I'm going to see if they equal that. So 7/4 plus negative 3/4. Does it equal 1? And 7/4 plus negative 3/4 is 4/4, which is 1, so that checks out. So it looks like my point is correct. So this is the solution to the system of equations. Something that I want to explain to you and make sure that you are prepared for is that this is a lot of work. It's meant to be a lot of work, and it's easy to make mistakes, and so you want to be careful. I encourage you to use Desmos when you go through, and it's an easy way to check your work. You have to come back and solve it algebraically too, but Desmos is a great way to see if you're in the right direction or not, and to help guide you through. Okay, so you want to be very careful when you do this. Make sure you take your entire expression and substitute it in, and beware of those parentheses.